If you came here looking for easy money, a quick trick, some shortcut that hands you success without ever asking anything of you in return, you can leave right now. Close this video. This channel is not for you, and it never will be. But if you are somebody who is willing to be disciplined, somebody who is actually willing to do the work on yourself, not just talk about doing it, somebody who knows how to listen, sit with what they hear, and actually draw conclusions from it instead of forgetting it by tomorrow morning, then you are exactly who this was made for. You did not stumble onto this by accident. You chose the right video. So welcome, genuinely. If that description just described you, take 5 seconds right now and hit subscribe. Hit like. Let me see exactly how many of us are actually built this way. Let's get into it. 12 months from now, you will be standing in a different life than the one you are standing in tonight. That part is not optional. Time does not ask you whether you are ready for it to pass. It passes regardless. The only thing that is actually optional is the direction. Most people never consciously choose a direction. They simply continue whatever they were already doing, and the months carry them somewhere. Usually, that somewhere looks a lot like where they started. Sometimes it is a few steps further down a road that was never quite working in the first place. Here is something almost nobody says out loud, so let's say it clearly right now. The next 12 months of your life will not be defined by one giant decision. It will not be defined by quitting the job, ending the relationship, moving to the new city, launching the business. Those moments exist and they matter, but they are rare, and they are not where your year actually gets built. Your year gets built somewhere much quieter than that. It gets built in how you spend a random Tuesday evening, in how you respond the moment somebody hands you their conflict, in how you treat the people who are easiest to take for granted, in the tiny, uncomfortable, forgettable moments that show up dozens of times inside a single week. Each one of those moments looks insignificant by itself. String enough of them together for a year, and they quietly rebuild your entire life, whether you are paying attention or not. Most people organize their whole idea of change around the big decision. They wait for the big career move to save them. They wait for the big relationship conversation to fix everything. They wait for the big purchase to finally make them feel like they have arrived. Almost every single time, that is backwards. Big decisions do not get made in a vacuum. They get made inside conditions, and those conditions were quietly assembled by hundreds of small decisions that came before them. The big decision does not create your trajectory, it reveals the trajectory that was already being built underneath it, one small choice at a time. So, if you actually want a different big decision a year from today, you do not start by hunting for one. You start with the small ones, the unglamorous ones, the ones nobody applauds and nobody notices, except the version of you standing here exactly 1 year from now. Today, we are going to walk through 10 of those small decisions in detail. Nothing here requires extra money you do not have. Nothing here requires extra time you do not have. Nothing here requires talent, luck, or permission from anyone. Every single one of them is a choice available to you starting the moment this ends, and available to you again the next time the same situation shows up, which for most of these will be within days. By the time we finish, you will have a clear, specific list, and you will know exactly which of these choices you have been quietly losing to default, and exactly what to do differently the next time that same fork in the road appears. But before we get into the 10, you need to sit with something uncomfortable for a moment. You need to understand exactly what it has already cost you to not make these decisions. Most people never see this cost, because the cost does not announce itself. It is not a bill in the mail, it is an absence. It is the relationship that never got deeper. It is the honest conversation that never happened. It is the version of you that quietly never got the chance to exist, because nobody ever stepped in to build the conditions for it. Here is the mechanism, plainly. When you do not make the small decision, the decision still gets made. It just gets made by something other than you. Your habits make it. Your environment makes it. The people around you make it. Whatever pattern was already running before you would have had to interrupt it. That pattern simply continues, unopposed. And the pattern that keeps running without your intervention is, almost by definition, the exact pattern that has been producing the parts of your life you are not fully satisfied with right now. Which means allowing it to continue, by quietly failing to intervene, is functionally choosing to keep manufacturing the same results. Every recurring situation in your life already has a default outcome baked into it. The family conflict keeps repeating if you keep responding to it in the same old way. The relationship that feels shallow stays shallow if nobody ever decides to go beneath the surface. The conversation stays scripted and safe if nobody drops the script. The uncomfortable phone call stays unmade if nobody ever picks up the phone. Notice something here. The default is not neutral. It feels neutral, but it is not. The default is itself a decision. It is the decision to keep producing this same year on repeat indefinitely. Most people never see it this way because the cost hides behind something that looks like ordinary life. You go to work, you come home, you scroll, you sleep, you repeat, and none of it feels like a decision being made, so none of it registers as a choice. But it is a choice. It is thousands of small choices made silently, every single week, most of them defaulting toward the pattern that already exists. Here is what almost nobody tells you, and it is the single most important idea in everything we are about to walk through. Your actual agency, the real leverage you have over your own life, does not primarily live inside the big decisions. It lives inside the small ones, because the small ones happen constantly, dozens of times a day, thousands of times across a year. The big decisions feel heavy and important, but they are rare events. The small ones are the actual terrain you are walking through, every single day. Whether you notice the terrain or not, every single time you fail to decide on purpose, you have effectively decided anyway. You have decided to let the existing pattern run one more cycle. By the end of a year, you will have made tens of thousands of these micro non-decisions, each one reinforcing whatever structure was already in place before you arrived. This is why the version of you who begins deliberately making these small decisions today can build, in 12 months, a life that the version of you who keeps drifting on autopilot could not build in a decade. Not because the deliberate version works harder in some abstract sense, because the deliberate version interrupts the pattern at the exact moment it could have been interrupted. Over and over, week after week, until the interruption becomes the new default itself. Think about how quietly this actually operates in a real week. Monday morning, somebody hands you a piece of drama that is not yours, and you either absorb it or you do not. Tuesday evening, a purchase decision shows up, small on its own, and you either run it through a filter or you do not. Wednesday, a conversation happens where you could either perform a version of yourself or actually show up, and you choose one or the other, usually without even registering that a choice was made at all. None of these moments feel significant while they are happening. They feel like background noise, the ordinary texture of an ordinary week. And that is exactly the problem, because background noise, repeated often enough, is not background at all. It is the actual architecture of your life, quietly pouring the foundation for everything that comes after it. Most people wait for a single defining moment to arrive and rescue them from a pattern they have been unhappy with for years. That moment rarely comes on its own. What actually happens, almost every time, is that somebody gets tired enough of the pattern to finally start intervening in the small version of it. One ordinary Tuesday at a time, and only much later do they look back and realize that this was the turning point all along. Not a single dramatic scene, a long string of quiet interruptions that nobody else was watching. So here they are, 10 decisions, each one specific enough to actually apply the next time the relevant moment shows up. Each one available to you in situations that repeat multiple times inside an ordinary week. None of them dramatic, all of them, together, compounding into something dramatic anyway. The first two are about stopping a leak, not building anything new yet. Before you can build real momentum, you have to stop losing energy and money to places that were never yours to lose them to in the first place. The first decision is this: stop absorbing conflict you did not create. Right now, most people are being quietly recruited into disputes that have nothing to do with their actual life. A family disagreement they got pulled into without asking to be. A workplace disagreement between two coworkers they have no real stake in. Social tension between people they barely know that somehow still ends up occupying their evening. It feels involuntary in the moment. It is not. There is a decision point every single time this happens, and almost nobody is making that decision on purpose. They are simply reacting to the social pressure of the moment. Conflict has a way of recruiting bystanders. It presents itself to you, hands you somebody else's frustration, and quietly asks you to pick a side, weigh in, react, validate, engage. And the social pressure to respond is very real. Nobody wants to come across as cold. Nobody wants to seem like they simply do not care about the people around them. So people get pulled in, argument after argument, week after week, and their emotional bandwidth quietly gets spent on situations that were never actually assigned to them. Here is the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. Conflict you did not create is very rarely yours to resolve. Most of the time, your participation does not calm the situation down. It adds one more voice to a room that already had too many opinions circulating through it. Meanwhile, your calm withdrawal often does more good than your involvement ever could, because it models a quieter, steadier way of existing in the room, and it protects the exact energy you will need later for the things that genuinely matter to you. The fix is to install one default response, use it forever, and stop reinventing your reaction every single time. When somebody brings you a conflict you did not create, you listen for a moment, you acknowledge how they are feeling, and you decline to pick a side. You do not need to be cold about it. A simple line does the job. Something like, "That sounds genuinely difficult. I really hope the two of you find a way through it." Then you step back. The conflict stays where it belongs. Your energy stays with you. Run this consistently for a year, and the amount of mental bandwidth you get back is enormous. Bandwidth for your own goals, your own relationships, your own work. And somewhat counterintuitively, the drama around you often settles down on its own, simply because it stopped receiving your attention as fuel. The second decision is this: let one simple filter run before every meaningful purchase. Would the version of you standing 10 years from today actually respect this purchase? Not merely approve of it in passing, respect it. Look back at the decision and think, yes, that was a genuinely reasonable use of resources given the direction I was actually heading in. Most spending decisions get made entirely by the version of you that exists right now, with zero input from any other version of yourself. The present version wants comfort immediately. It has limited patience for delayed reward. It does not naturally weigh consequences 5 or 10 years out. Left alone, it will build a spending pattern that rarely matches what the fuller version of you actually wants out of a financial life. This filter is not designed to kill every small pleasure in your life. Coffee, an evening out, a small treat here and there, none of that needs to pass through a 10-year filter. It is the bigger purchases, the upgrades, the impulse buys, the slow creeping inflation of your lifestyle, where this one small question produces a genuinely different answer than your present tense instincts would. Pick a threshold: $50, $200, whatever number fits your actual financial life. Above that number, before you buy, you run the question. It costs you roughly 10 seconds. Some purchases pass instantly and clearly. Some fail instantly and clearly. Some sit right on the line, in which case you simply wait a day or two and see whether the desire survives contact with a little patience. Run this filter consistently for a year, and your financial picture looks structurally different by the end of it. Not because you deprived yourself of everything enjoyable, but because a leak that used to run constantly finally closed, and a leak closed for a full year compounds into a meaningfully different trajectory than a leak left running. Picture two people, roughly the same income, roughly the same lifestyle, at the start of the same year. One of them runs no filter at all and simply buys whatever feels good in the moment it is being considered. The other one runs this one 10-second question before anything above their chosen threshold. By month 3, the difference is barely visible from the outside. Maybe a slightly smaller pile of unopened boxes, a slightly quieter credit card statement. By month 12, the gap has become impossible to ignore. One of them has a financial cushion they did not have a year earlier, built almost entirely out of purchases they simply chose not to make. The other one has roughly the same collection of things they always accumulate, most of it already fading into the background of ordinary life, providing less satisfaction with each passing month than it did the day it arrived. Same income, same opportunities. Radically different financial direction, built entirely on top of one 10-second question, asked consistently instead of skipped. Once those two leaks are closed, the next layer is about where your remaining energy actually flows, because most people today are surrounded by other people constantly and still quietly starving for real connection underneath all that noise. The third decision is this: choose exactly one relationship to go deep on this year. Not your family as an abstract category, not your friend group as a whole. One specific person: a partner, a sibling, a parent, a close friend. One relationship you decide, on purpose, to prioritize and deepen across the next 12 months. Most adults maintain a wide social footprint with almost no real depth anywhere inside it. 100 loose acquaintances, 10 actual friends, and every one of them touched lightly on the surface, without ever really going further. It can feel like richness simply because of the volume of contact. Very often it is closer to the opposite: a kind of quiet relational poverty disguised as a full social calendar. Depth requires focus, and focus cannot be evenly divided across 10 directions at once. Realistically, you can invest deeply in 2 or 3 relationships at a time, at most. Most years, the single most effective move is choosing exactly one relationship and pouring deliberate extra energy into that one specific connection, while simply maintaining everything else at its current level. Sit with the honest question tonight: which relationship in my life would benefit most from a full year of deliberate attention? Very often, the honest answer is somebody you used to be close to, somebody whose relationship has quietly drifted onto autopilot for years, when it could actually be so much more than it currently is. For the year, you start making decisions in favor of that one relationship specifically. You call when you would normally have let it slide. You show up when you would normally have found a polite excuse. You ask the deeper question instead of the safe one. You stay present through the harder conversation instead of finding a graceful exit. And here is the part almost nobody mentions. Once a relationship has genuinely deepened, it tends to stay deepened, long after your focused year of extra attention is over. Choose the person tonight. Make the first small move tomorrow. Picture 2 versions of the exact same person, 5 years apart, each maintaining roughly the same circle of 30 or 40 people in their life. In the first version, every one of those relationships stays at the same shallow depth it started at, because attention gets spread so thin across all of them that none of it ever accumulates into anything. In the second version, that same person quietly chose one relationship a year to go deep on and simply maintained the rest at their existing level. 5 years later, the first version still has 30 or 40 pleasant, surface level connections. The second version has that same wide circle, plus 4 or 5 relationships that have become genuinely load bearing. The kind of relationship you could call at 2 in the morning without hesitation. Same starting point, same number of people. Completely different depth because one of them made a decision the other one never got around to making. The fourth decision is this: stop performing inside your conversations and actually show up as yourself. Most adults, in most everyday conversations, are not fully present. They are running a performance of themselves, the witty version, the impressive version, the composed version, while the real conversation quietly happens somewhere just outside the reach of that performance. Performing is exhausting, even when you barely notice it happening. It consumes mental energy that could have gone directly into listening. It produces conversations that feel technically fine on the surface and strangely hollow underneath because nobody in the room is fully being themselves in that moment. The conversations that genuinely nourish you tend to be the ones where the performance drops, where you say the slightly awkward thing instead of the polished thing, where you admit you do not actually know instead of pretending you do, where you let a silence sit in the room for a second instead of rushing to fill it with something safe. The decision, run consistently, is to drop the performance wherever you reasonably can. It will feel exposed at first, almost uncomfortably so. Stay with that discomfort anyway, because on the other side of it are conversations you have quietly been missing for most of your adult life. You will not manage this perfectly every time. Some conversations will still pull you back into performance mode out of habit. That is completely fine. Every single time you notice it happening, you get the chance to choose differently again. Run this for a year, and your entire social landscape reorganizes itself, quietly, around the people who were also looking for something real and finally found it once you stopped performing around them. The fifth decision is this: ask one carefully chosen question of one person ahead of you every single month. Once a month, you bring one specific question to one person who has already walked further down a road you are currently on. A mentor, a senior colleague, a wiser friend, somebody whose judgment you genuinely respect. Most adults quietly stop asking questions of people ahead of them somewhere around a certain age. There is an unspoken pressure to already know things. Nobody wants to seem inexperienced. So people spend months, sometimes years, slowly figuring things out on their own, sometimes getting it wrong, while somebody nearby already had the answer and was simply never asked. The right question, aimed at the right person, can quietly save you months of trial and error, and the people who are further along the path are usually flattered to be asked, not bothered by it in the slightest. They remember exactly what it felt like to be standing where you are standing right now. The rule here is specificity, not something broad like "what should I do with my career?" That produces a vague, forgettable answer. Something closer to, how did you actually decide between these two specific paths when you were at this exact stage? That produces an answer you can genuinely use. Run this for a full year, and you will have asked 12 specific, carefully chosen questions of 12 different people who are ahead of you, and received 10 or 11 genuinely useful answers in return. The relationships tend to deepen through this process as well, because people remember exactly who came to them with the thoughtful questions. The sixth decision is this: write down whatever you are actually trying to figure out, instead of only turning it over silently in your head. You cannot fully resolve a genuinely difficult problem using unstructured thought alone, because thinking, left entirely to itself, tends to circle. It replays the same handful of considerations from slightly different angles and quietly mistakes that repetition for progress. Writing interrupts the circle. The simple act of putting a situation into actual words on a page forces sequence onto it, forces structure onto it, forces you to select specific language, and that entire process surfaces things that pure circular thinking would have quietly skipped right past. 10 focused minutes of writing about a real problem tends to produce more genuine clarity than 10 hours of simply turning it over mentally, because the page does not let you get away with vagueness the way your own mind quietly does. The practice itself is simple. Anytime you find yourself stuck on a decision, an emotion, a relationship issue, you open a notebook or a blank document and you write about it for roughly 10 minutes. This is not journaling in the loose daily sense. This is targeted problem writing, aimed at the one specific thing currently occupying your mind. Run this consistently across a year, and you will have written your way through dozens of genuinely difficult situations, each one becoming clearer for having been pulled out of your head and placed somewhere you could actually examine it from the outside. The seventh decision is this: be the first person in the room willing to name the tension nobody else is naming. Almost every room carries something unspoken inside it: a family dinner, a work meeting, a two-person conversation that keeps circling the same subject without ever landing on it. There is almost always some obvious frustration, some obvious discomfort that everybody senses and nobody names out loud. Most people, most of the time, quietly choose to protect the silence rather than break it. Picture a capable, well liked professional somewhere in their early 40s who has quietly plateaued for years, both at work and in their closest relationships. Nothing dramatic has gone wrong, everything is simply flat. Look closely enough at a pattern like that, and very often you find the exact same habit repeating across every room this person walks into. They are always waiting for somebody else to name what actually needs naming. Usually nobody does. The tension just sits there, the conversation stays surface level, the relationship stays pleasant, technically fine, and quietly shallow. The shift is simple to describe, and genuinely uncomfortable the first several times you attempt it. In any room where you sense unspoken tension, you become the one who names it, not aggressively, but with real curiosity instead. Something as simple as, "It feels like there is something going on here we are not actually talking about. Is that worth bringing up?" Or, "We seem to keep circling back to this same thing. Can we just look at it directly for a moment?" The first few attempts will feel presumptuous, almost like you are overstepping some invisible line. Do it anyway. What tends to happen afterward is that the room itself changes shape. Tension, once named out loud, very often either dissolves entirely or finally gets properly addressed. People visibly relax. Conversations become real instead of performative. Follow that same plateaued professional through an actual year of practicing this, and the arc tends to look remarkably consistent. In the first few weeks, naming things out loud feels genuinely uncomfortable, almost like breaking an unwritten rule everyone else had quietly agreed to follow. By month 2 or 3, it starts feeling less like risk and more like habit, closer to muscle memory than courage. By month 6, the people around them have noticed a pattern of their own, that this is the person in the room who will actually say the thing everyone else is quietly thinking. That reputation, once it forms, changes how people treat you in ways that keep compounding on their own. Meetings you used to sit through quietly become meetings where your voice is one of the first ones people wait to hear. Conversations that used to stay comfortable and shallow start reaching places they never reached before, because somebody in the room finally proved it was safe to go there. None of this required new credentials or a new skill set. It required one decision, repeated consistently, inside rooms that already existed. And over time, you quietly become the person others bring their genuinely hard things to, which in turn makes you the person who actually gets listened to when it matters most. The eighth decision is this: make exactly one difficult phone call every single Sunday evening. Just one. The call you have been quietly avoiding, the relative you know you should reach out to, the friend you have been gently ducking, the unresolved issue that has been sitting untouched on your list for weeks now. Most adults accumulate a real backlog of unmade difficult calls over time. Each one feels small in isolation. The accumulated weight of the entire backlog is anything but small. It sits quietly in the background of your life, occupying mental space, generating a low grade unease that never fully goes away, even when you are not consciously thinking about any of it. The practice clears that backlog on a fixed schedule, instead of leaving it entirely to willpower and good intentions. Every Sunday evening, you look at your list, you choose the single hardest item sitting on it, and you make that call. You do not rehearse it for an hour beforehand. You do not push it a few more days down the road. You make it while your resolve is still fresh. Run this consistently for a year, and you will have addressed 52 separate things that were quietly weighing on you. Many of them turn out easier than you had feared going in. Some genuinely are harder than expected. Every single one of them comes off your list permanently, and the version of you who handles difficult calls on a weekly rhythm, instead of avoiding them indefinitely, is carrying visibly less drag through daily life than the version of you who lets the backlog quietly pile up instead. The ninth decision is this: leave social gatherings before the energy in the room goes stale. Most people stay far too long at almost everything they attend. The energy of a gathering tends to peak somewhere in the middle and decline steadily after that. The best conversations tend to happen earlier. The most interesting people tend to leave first. The remaining stretch of time gets spent deep inside diminishing returns, and you eventually head home more drained than the entire gathering was ever actually worth. Social convention quietly pushes you to stay. Leaving while the energy is still genuinely good can feel almost rude, like you are walking out right before the best part arrives. So most people wait until the energy has clearly gone flat, and only then do they leave, carrying that flat, depleted energy directly home with them, where it quietly colors the following day as well. The better move, consistently, is leaving while things are still good. You carry that good energy home with you instead of having it slowly drained away from you. You sleep better that night. The next day genuinely starts better, and somewhat paradoxically, the people you spend time with often remember the gathering more fondly, precisely because you left while it was still alive, instead of quietly contributing to its decline. Install one internal signal for yourself. The moment you notice the room's energy beginning to fade, you go. You do not wait for somebody else to make the first move toward the door. A short, warm goodbye and a clean early exit, well before the inevitable decline sets in. The first several times you do this, it will feel slightly transgressive. People will notice. Some may even mention it. Do not worry about that reaction. By the third or fourth time, the people around you simply understand that you leave a little early, and you quietly become known as somebody whose energy is deliberately protected rather than freely available for anyone to drain. Add this up across an entire year of ordinary social life, and the difference is far larger than it looks in any single evening. A handful of dinners, a handful of parties, one or two late gatherings a month, each one shaved back to its actual high point instead of stretched out into its slow decline. On its own, each individual evening looks almost identical either way. Stacked across 52 weeks, one version of you has spent the year quietly leaking energy into the diminishing hour at the end of every gathering, arriving at Monday mornings already a little depleted before the week has even started. The other version of you has spent that same year protecting exactly that hour, week after week, and arrives at most Mondays with something left in reserve. Nobody at any single party could have pointed to the difference. Over 12 months, it becomes one of the most quietly decisive advantages on this entire list. The 10th decision is this: read for 30 minutes before bed instead of reaching for a screen. The very last input of your day quietly shapes your sleep and shapes the mental state you wake up into the next morning. Most adults end their day with the lowest effort input readily available: a screen, passive entertainment, endless scrolling through content that demands almost nothing of them. The mind heads into sleep having just been fed something that produced essentially nothing: no real structure, no reflection, no genuine quiet. 30 focused minutes of reading before sleep changes the entire shape of that final hour and the night that follows it. The mind has been fed something with actual language and structure behind it instead of pure noise. The transition into sleep becomes noticeably calmer. The following morning starts from a genuinely different mental state. Run this across a full year, and the arithmetic is simple. Roughly 180 hours of reading you otherwise would never have done. Real books across multiple subjects, genuine intellectual nourishment absorbed inside the exact window most people currently hand over entirely to a feed with no author and no real argument behind it whatsoever. The swap itself is straightforward. Whatever screen has been occupying that final hour before sleep gets replaced, at minimum for the final 30 minutes, with an actual book. Any category works. Fiction, biography, philosophy, business, whatever genuinely interests you. The specific title matters far less than showing up to it, consistently, night after night, across an entire year. So here is everything laid out together, clearly, one final time. Stop absorbing conflict you did not create. Let one simple question filter every meaningful purchase. Choose exactly one relationship to invest in deeply this year. Stop performing inside your conversations. Ask one specific person one specific question every month. Write down whatever you are genuinely trying to figure out. Be the first one willing to name the tension in the room. Make one difficult phone call every Sunday evening. Leave gatherings before the energy goes stale. Read for 30 minutes before bed instead of scrolling. You do not need to install all 10 of these tonight, and honestly, you should not try to. Choose the 3 that hit hardest as you were listening. Install exactly those 3 tomorrow. Run them consistently for a month. Then add 3 more. By the end of 2 months, you are running 6 of these on a real, consistent basis. By the end of 3 months, all 10 are running simultaneously, quietly, in the background of your ordinary week. The integration itself is gradual. The compounding underneath it is not. It begins the very first time you actually run any single one of these decisions instead of letting the old default quietly take over again. Here is the honest truth sitting underneath everything we just walked through together. The next 12 months of your life are going to be shaped by something, whether you actively participate in that shaping or not. Either shaped by the decisions you deliberately make inside these small, constantly repeating moments, or shaped by the defaults you allow to keep running simply because nobody ever stepped in to interrupt them. That shaping does not pause and wait patiently for you to feel ready. It is happening today, quietly, in the background of your ordinary week, whether you consciously notice it happening or not. Most people will spend the coming year in roughly the same shape as the year they already lived. Not because they lack ability, and not because they lack intelligence, simply because they never once treated the small repeating moment as an actual decision worth making on purpose. The people who do not repeat their previous year are, without exception, the people who eventually start treating these 10 quiet moments as real decisions, made deliberately day after day, week after week, for 12 consecutive months. You are entirely capable of being one of those people, starting tonight with 3 of these 10 decisions chosen before you go to sleep. The first day of this will not feel like much of anything. The second day will not feel like much either. By roughly month 3, you will start noticing something quietly shifting underneath the surface of your ordinary weeks. By month 6, that shift will be undeniable, not just to you, but to the people around you as well. By month 12, you will be standing inside a meaningfully different life than the one you are currently living in right now, while you listen to this. So let's bring all of it together into one final honest conclusion, because everything we just walked through actually reduces down to a single idea. Your life is not primarily built by the handful of dramatic moments you can point back to and tell a good story about. It is built by the thousands of ordinary, forgettable moments that happen in between those dramatic moments, the ones nobody ever mentions in a highlight reel because nobody was watching closely enough to notice them happening at all. Every one of the 10 decisions we covered today lives inside exactly that kind of moment. A moment that shows up quietly, asks almost nothing of you in terms of time or money or talent, and then disappears again within seconds, whether you engaged with it or not. The people who end up living remarkably different lives, 5 or 10 years from now, are almost never the people who had access to some resource everyone else was denied. They are the people who simply stopped letting these small moments pass by unexamined. They decided, deliberately, that the ordinary Tuesday evening mattered exactly as much as the big once-a-year decision, because the ordinary Tuesday evening was quietly where the big decision's outcome was actually being determined all along. That is the entire model, stripped down to its foundation. Not motivation, not a single burst of willpower that fades out after a week. A structure of small, repeatable decisions run consistently, long enough for compounding to take over and start doing the heavy lifting on its own. Discipline gets you through the first few weeks, when nothing yet feels different. Structure is what keeps you running the decision once discipline alone would have quietly let it slide. And identity is what happens somewhere around month 6 or 7, when you stop having to consciously choose the decision at all, because by then it has simply become part of who you are. This is the actual mechanism behind almost every meaningful transformation you have ever admired in somebody else. Not a single leap. A long series of small, consistent interruptions to an old pattern, sustained for long enough that a new pattern quietly took its place. The decisions themselves are small. The year is arriving regardless of what you decide to do with it. The only real question left is who ends up doing the actual shaping, you on purpose, or the same old defaults, running quietly on repeat, exactly like they always have. This is Max Solven, and I will see you in the next one.